I am Naomi, 32 years old, and the founder of a tech empire. 12 years ago, my parents drained my bank account, packed up their lives, and moved across the country while I was recovering from surgery. They did not say goodbye. They simply left a note on the empty kitchen counter telling me to figure it out. For over a decade, I was entirely erased from their world. But last Tuesday, as my company prepared for a massive public launch, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. My mother was begging for a reunion because, according to her, family needs to stick together. They thought they were reeling in the same vulnerable, broken girl they discarded. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into a financial trap that would strip them of everything they valued. Before I share the rest of my story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to build your own empire from the ashes of someone else's betrayal. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Austin, Texas. I was standing in my corner office on the top floor of the Apex Root Solutions building, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline. My company develops supply chain management software, and we were less than a month away from our initial public offering. The desk behind me was covered in financial disclosures, legal filings, and valuation reports. I had spent the last 12 years pouring my blood, sweat, and sanity into building this company from absolute nothing. I had fought through poverty, predatory investors, and exhausting 80-hour work weeks to reach this exact moment of ultimate success. My mind was sharp-focused entirely on the numbers that would soon make me a billionaire. Then, my personal cell phone buzzed on the polished glass of my desk. I rarely receive messages on that device during business hours. Only a handful of trusted colleagues and friends even have the number. I picked up the phone and saw an unfamiliar area code. The preview of the text message made the breath catch in my throat. It read, "Naomi, it is Mom. Your father and I are in Texas for a few days. We know it has been a long time, but family needs to stick together. We really need to see you. Please call me back." For one brief, humiliating second, my body betrayed me. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. My chest tightened so severely I had to grip the edge of my desk just to remain upright. The sudden rush of adrenaline was a ghost from the past, the physical memory of a terrified 20-year-old girl who had woken up to an empty house and a negative bank balance. The trauma of that abandonment was etched so deeply into my nervous system that a mere cluster of pixels on a screen could still trigger a panic attack. But that physical reaction lasted exactly 5 seconds. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the panic wash away, replaced instantly by the absolute stone-cold clarity of a chief executive officer. I was no longer a scared college student begging for scraps of affection. I was a woman who routinely negotiated with corporate sharks and dismantled hostile takeover attempts before breakfast. I opened my eyes and stared at the message again. Family needs to stick together. The sheer audacity of those words was staggering. Where was that philosophy when I was sleeping in my car because my credit was mysteriously destroyed? Where was that family loyalty when I was surviving on instant noodles and working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on? For 12 years, they had not sent a single birthday card, a single email, or a single text message to see if I was even alive. The timing of this sudden reappearance was not a coincidence. My company was entering its quiet period before the public offering. While my personal wealth had always been relatively private, the recent business filings meant that my name and the astronomical valuation of Apex Root Solutions were starting to generate buzz in financial circles. They had smelled the money. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. They were not here to apologize or to make amends for a decade of silence. They were here because they wanted something. My first instinct was to delete the message, block the number, and call my building security to ensure Richard and Caroline could never get past the lobby. It would have been the easiest route. It would have been the safest route. But blocking them would not satisfy the burning curiosity in my gut, nor would it provide the closure I suddenly realized I needed. Ignoring them meant they would remain a lingering threat, a dark cloud hovering over my upcoming success. I needed to look them in the eye. I needed to see exactly what kind of desperate scheme they were trying to pull. I unlocked my phone and typed a brief, emotionless reply. I told them I had a tight schedule but could spare an hour for dinner. I picked a high-end, exclusive steakhouse downtown, the kind of place that requires reservations weeks in advance, unless you know the owner. I gave them the time and the address, adding no warmth, no greeting, and no promise of forgiveness. The reply came back almost instantly, brimming with fake enthusiasm and excessive emojis. They were thrilled. They could not wait to see their beautiful daughter. The extreme shift from a decade of absolute silence to this suffocating affection confirmed everything I suspected. They were desperate. The scent of their desperation practically radiated through the phone screen. I placed the phone back on my desk and walked over to the private bathroom connected to my office. I looked at myself in the mirror. I adjusted the collar of my tailored designer suit, checked my posture, and fastened a luxury watch around my wrist. This was my armor. I was preparing for battle, though my parents did not even realize a war had been declared. I gathered my briefcase, instructed my executive assistant to hold all my calls for the remainder of the evening, and took the private elevator down to the parking garage. As I drove my car toward the restaurant, my mind was entirely clear. I was about to face the people who had tried to ruin my life, and I was going to let them dig their own graves. I handed the valet my keys and stepped into the dimly lit, mahogany-paneled foyer of the restaurant. The maitre d' led me toward the private alcove I had requested. I expected to see two faces, the mother and father who had vanished a decade ago. Instead, I saw four. Sitting around the circular table were Richard and Caroline, but flanking them were my older sister Brittany and her husband Jamal. It was a calculated ambush. They brought reinforcements. As soon as I stepped into the light of the chandelier, my mother leaped from her leather chair. She threw her arms wide, her face twisting into a mask of theatrical agony. "Naomi, my beautiful girl," she cried out, pulling me into a suffocating embrace that smelled heavily of cheap floral perfume and desperation. As her arms clamped around my shoulders, the luxurious restaurant around me dissolved. The smell of the steakhouse vanished, replaced by the sterile stench of rubbing alcohol and hospital soap. I was 20 years old again. I had just been discharged after an emergency appendectomy, still clutching my side in agony, walking into the house I shared with my family. But there was no furniture. There were no voices. There was only a single piece of lined notebook paper sitting on the bare kitchen island. I picked it up with shaking hands. The note read, "We had to go. You will figure it out." I had limped to the bank the next morning, my stitches burning, only to find our joint account completely drained. The teller looked at me with pity as I stared at the negative balance, realizing I had no rent money, no food, and no family. The cold realization that they had left me to literally starve or die of an infection had shattered my soul into a million jagged pieces. I blinked, pulling myself out of the memory. The chandelier light swam back into focus. I gently but firmly detached my mother's arms from my neck and took a step back, putting a solid foot of distance between us. "Hello, Caroline," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Her fake smile faltered at the use of her first name, but she quickly recovered, wiping away a dry, invisible tear. "We missed you so much," Richard chimed in, not bothering to stand up. He patted the empty chair beside him. "Sit down! Let us catch up!" I took the seat furthest away from them, placing my briefcase on the floor. Brittany scoffed loudly. She was draped in overly branded designer clothes, sporting a purse covered in massive gold logos that screamed financial insecurity. Jamal sat next to her, wearing a flashy suit that looked expensive but fit poorly, a thick gold watch practically sliding off his wrist. They looked like walking billboards for people trying desperately to prove they had money. "Nice of you to finally show up for the family," Brittany sneered, twirling a lock of her hair and giving me a slow, judgmental once-over. "We flew all the way here, and you act like you are doing us a favor. I see you are still wearing boring suits. Some things never change." Before I could respond to my sister's blatant hostility, the waiter arrived with the menus. Jamal snatched one from the waiter's hand without looking at him. "All right, listen up," Jamal announced loudly, leaning back in his chair and spreading his arms wide, taking up as much space as possible. "We are going to start with 3 orders of the seafood tower. Bring us the Wagyu tomahawk steaks for the main course, medium rare, and let us get 2 bottles of your best vintage champagne. The expensive stuff." He tossed the menu back onto the table and pointed a finger at me. "Naomi, you just get whatever side salad you want. I know you tech support girls watch your figures, and we are not waiting for you to decide." He laughed at his own joke, and Brittany joined in with a high-pitched giggle. My parents smiled proudly at him, as if he had just done something incredibly charming. Jamal was attempting to establish dominance, treating me like a subordinate employee he had dragged along to a business lunch. The waiter looked at me hesitantly, sensing the awkward dynamic, but I simply gave him a slight nod to proceed with the order. "You can handle a salad, right?" Jamal asked, leaning across the table with a condescending smirk. "I know Austin is expensive, so do not worry if you cannot afford the good meat. We will let you take a picture of our steaks for your social media." He winked at Richard, who chuckled approvingly. They still believed their own outdated narrative. They honestly thought I was a struggling entry-level IT worker clinging to a meager paycheck. They thought this display of fake wealth would intimidate me, that it would force me back into my old role as the submissive, inadequate scapegoat of the family. "So," Naomi Caroline said, sipping her water and looking at me with feigned pity, "are you still working at that little computer repair place? It is a shame you never finished a proper business degree like your sister. Brittany is a vice president now, you know, and Jamal is moving millions in commercial real estate." I kept my face perfectly neutral, letting them construct their fragile tower of lies right in front of me. I did not correct them. I did not mention that my company was the primary vendor for the restaurant we were sitting in, or that my business was about to go public with a valuation that would make Jamal's entire real estate firm look like pocket change. I just watched them gloat, absorbing every insult and every arrogant smirk. The real conflict was not about what they thought of my career. That was secondary. The real conflict was hiding right beneath their desperate, overly loud display of wealth, and I was going to sit back and let them expose it themselves. The feast arrived in a parade of silver trays and clinking crystal. Waiters descended upon our table, arranging towering tiers of iced lobster oysters and king crab legs, followed closely by massive sizzling cuts of Wagyu beef. Jamal tore into the seafood with a ravenous lack of grace, cracking shells and gesturing wildly with a crab leg in his hand as he spoke. Brittany carefully positioned her plate, taking out her phone to capture the perfect angle of the extravagant meal, ensuring her heavily branded handbag was clearly visible in the frame of the photo. She posted it immediately, desperate for the validation of her imaginary audience. Between bites of steak, my family launched their masterclass in gaslighting. It was a synchronized routine they had perfected over decades, designed to tear down my self-esteem piece by piece. Richard started the interrogation, cutting his meat aggressively. "So, Naomi, are you still doing that mid-level tech support gig? It must be exhausting, resetting passwords all day. Do you at least get health benefits, or are you still working as a contractor?" I sliced a small piece of my salad, keeping my movements deliberate and calm. "I manage software systems," I replied simply, offering them absolutely nothing they could use. Caroline sighed, shaking her head with an exaggerated display of maternal disappointment. It is just such a shame you never developed any real ambition. Look at Jamal. He is a self-starter. He owns his own real estate brokerage. He is out there making waves, while you are hiding behind a computer screen. She took a sip of her champagne and looked at me over the rim of the glass. And your personal life, Naomi? It breaks my heart. 32 years old and still completely alone. No husband, no children, no prospects. You are getting older. The dating pool for women your age is shrinking every single day. Brittany reached across the table and placed a hand over her heart, her face contorting into a mask of fake sympathy. It must be so incredibly lonely for you, living in a tiny apartment, coming home to an empty room every night. I honestly do not know how you survive the isolation. Jamal and I have such a vibrant, blessed life. We are surrounded by high society friends, we host galas, we have real connections. It is a completely different world. I let her talk. I let them all talk. From the outside, anyone watching would think I was a pathetic, beaten-down woman taking a verbal lashing from her superior, wealthy relatives. But beneath the surface, my mind was dissecting every single word, every micro-expression, every telltale sign of their absolute fraudulence. I noticed the frayed stitching on the cuffs of Jamal's suit jacket. I noticed that Brittany's designer handbag was from a collection released 4 years ago, and the gold plating on the clasp was visibly chipping. I watched the way Richard's hands trembled slightly when he reached for his drink, the hallmark sign of extreme, chronic financial stress. They were bleeding cash, and this entire dinner was a desperate stage play. The performance reached its crescendo when the waiters cleared our plates and the maitre d' approached the table. He carried a heavy black leather folder containing the bill. Because Jamal had loudly dominated the ordering process, the maitre d' naturally placed the folder directly in front of him. Jamal did not even open his jacket to pretend to reach for a wallet. He casually flipped the leather folder open, glanced at the total, and then slid it across the white linen tablecloth until it hit the edge of my water glass. The total staring up at me was $4,500. Jamal leaned back in his chair, linking his fingers over his stomach, his face splitting into a wide, entitled grin. Since you do not have kids or a husband to support, and since you have ignored us for an entire decade, you can go ahead and handle that. Consider this your family tax. You owe us for abandoning your duties as a daughter and a sister. Richard nodded solemnly in agreement, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. It is the absolute least you can do, Naomi. We spent a fortune raising you, and you vanished the second things got difficult. It is time you started paying your family back for everything we sacrificed. I looked at the piece of paper, then lifted my gaze to meet Jamal's eyes. They expected me to shrink, to stammer, to hand over my credit card out of pure guilt and intimidation. But before I could even formulate my refusal, the entire mood of the table experienced a violent, jarring whiplash. Brittany suddenly let out a loud, shuddering sob. The aggressive, condescending woman from 2 minutes ago vanished, replaced instantly by a weeping, helpless victim. Real tears began to streak down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with dramatic intensity. Caroline immediately rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her golden child and glaring at me as if I had just struck her. "It is just so unfair," Brittany wailed, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "We try so hard. Jamal works so hard, but the industry is so rigged against us." Jamal's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of deep, persecuted sorrow. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to look like a noble man crushed by an unjust world. "Naomi, you have to understand," he said, his voice dropping an octave to sound intensely serious. "My real estate firm is facing unprecedented, unfair discrimination. The market in our city is controlled by old money elites who want to freeze out successful Black-owned businesses. They are actively targeting me. The banks are looking for any excuse to pull my funding, just because I am a Black man shaking up their white neighborhoods. I have millions in deals lined up, but they are stalling my credit lines out of pure malice. He paused, letting the heavy accusation hang in the air, using his race as a convenient shield for what I already knew was massive financial incompetence and reckless spending. "We need a small favor," Caroline chimed in, her voice dripping with urgent manipulation. "Just to bridge the gap until Jamal's massive commissions clear next month. We need you to co-sign a loan." Richard pulled a thick stack of documents from his leather briefcase and slammed it onto the table right next to the exorbitant dinner bill. "It is a simple $200,000 bridge loan," Richard said, tapping the paper with his index finger. "You have been living cheaply for 12 years. Your credit score must be perfectly clean by now. We need you to sign this immediately. If you really care about your family, if you want to make up for your selfish behavior, you will put your name on this line right now and save your brother-in-law's business. You owe us this much, Naomi. Prove you are not completely worthless." I looked at the thick stack of loan documents resting against the leather check folder. The contrast between the extravagant $4,500 dinner bill and their desperate demand for my signature was almost poetic. I did not reach for the pen Richard thrust toward me. I did not even lean forward. I simply sat perfectly still, letting the silence stretch until it became heavy and suffocating. "I see," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of the guilt or fear they expected. "You invited me here, not out of family loyalty, but because you need a human shield for your financial incompetence." The air in the private alcove shifted instantly. The theatrical tears on Brittany's face vanished, replaced by a rigid, furious glare. Jamal slammed his fist onto the table, making the crystal glasses rattle. "Watch your mouth," Jamal snapped, leaning aggressively into my space. "We are offering you a chance to be part of something big. This is a temporary cash flow issue caused by systemic bias, not incompetence. You should be honored we are even asking for your help." I let out a short, cold laugh. It was not a sound of amusement, but of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Systemic bias," I repeated, meeting his angry stare without blinking. "You ordered a Wagyu tomahawk steak and vintage champagne while wearing a suit with frayed cuffs. Your wife is carrying a handbag from 4 seasons ago, with chipped hardware." Richard's hands have been shaking since he sat down. "This is not systemic bias, Jamal. This is the panic of people who are drowning in debt and looking for a life raft." Caroline gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The mask of the concerned, loving mother dissolved entirely, revealing the vicious, calculating woman underneath. "How dare you speak to us this way?" she hissed, her face turning a mottled red. "You selfish, bitter spinster. We gave you life. We raised you. We bring you to a 5-star restaurant, and this is how you repay us? You are exactly what you have always been, an ungrateful, miserable disappointment." Richard leaned over the table, his face inches from mine, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You will sign this document right now, Naomi. You will sign it, or I will make a scene in this restaurant that you will never forget. I will scream. I will let everyone in this building know exactly what kind of heartless, pathetic daughter you are. You will not humiliate this family." I stared back at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The threats that would have reduced me to a shaking, sobbing mess 12 years ago now sounded like the desperate whining of a cornered animal. "Make your scene, Richard," I said evenly. "Scream as loud as you want. Tell everyone in this restaurant whatever story makes you feel better. But I am not signing your loan, and I am certainly not paying for your extravagant dinner." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I placed it gently on top of the pile of loan documents. That is for my side salad and my sparkling water, I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. As for the rest of your feast, that sounds like a problem for your vibrant, blessed high society life. Panic instantly replaced the anger on Jamal's face. He looked at the leather folder, then back at me, his eyes wide with sudden terror. "Wait, Naomi," he stammered, his aggressive posture collapsing. "You cannot just leave us with this. My cards are tied up in the business accounts right now. I cannot put this on my personal tab." Brittany jumped up, grabbing my arm, her nails dug into my jacket sleeve. "You have to pay this," she demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. "We are your family. You cannot embarrass us like this." "The waiter is coming." I looked down at her hand, my expression so icy she immediately let go and stepped back. "You are not my family," I said quietly. "You are parasites who ran out of hosts. I suggest you figure out how to wash dishes in designer clothes." I turned my back on them and walked out of the alcove. I did not run. I did not look back. I walked with the slow, measured stride of a woman who held absolute power. Behind me, I could hear the frantic, hushed arguing breaking out at the table. I heard Jamal cursing, and Caroline frantically whispering to Richard to do something. As I passed the maitre d' at the front entrance, I gave him a polite nod. "My guests will be handling the bill tonight," I told him smoothly. "They might need a moment to gather their funds." I walked out into the warm Texas evening, handing my valet ticket to the attendant. As I waited for my car, my heart beat with a steady rhythmic calm. The confrontation had not broken me. It had energized me. My business instincts, honed by years of surviving the brutal tech industry, began dissecting the encounter with ruthless precision. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the scent of leather and success wrapping around me. I started the engine, but I did not pull out of the driveway immediately. My mind was racing, connecting the dots they had unwittingly provided. Jamal was a real estate broker, claiming to manage millions in commercial deals. Richard and Caroline portrayed themselves as wealthy investors. Yet they had flown across the country to beg and extort a mere $200,000 from the daughter they had discarded. In the world of high-stakes real estate and corporate finance, $200,000 is nothing. It is pocket change. It is a rounding error on a standard balance sheet. If Jamal's business was truly functional, he could secure a bridge loan from any secondary lender in a matter of hours. The fact that he could not, the fact that he needed a clean civilian co-signer, meant his credit was entirely radioactive. It meant traditional banks had blacklisted him. It meant he was likely leveraged to the breaking point with private predatory lenders. Their level of panic over such a relatively small amount of money meant they were not just struggling. They were standing on the precipice of total financial annihilation. They were weeks, maybe days, away from losing everything. I pulled out onto the main avenue, navigating the vibrant downtown traffic. I had wanted to know what kind of scheme they were trying to pull, and now I had my answer. But my curiosity was no longer satisfied. It was amplified. I needed to know the exact dimensions of the grave they had dug for themselves. I needed to see the ledgers, the property deeds, and the defaulted loans. I needed to know exactly who they owed money to. I tapped the voice command button on my steering wheel. "Call Oliver," I instructed the system. The phone rang twice before my corporate attorney answered. His voice was sharp and alert despite the late hour. "Naomi," he said, "tell me you are not calling to change the IPO valuation again." "No, Oliver," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. "I need you to pause the public offering preparation for the next 48 hours. I need you to initiate a full invasive forensic background check. I want a financial autopsy. I want to know about every shell company, every mortgage, every tax lien, and every private debt attached to Jamal and my parents. I want to know exactly who holds their leashes." The line was quiet for a moment. Naomi poking into family finances usually leads to a messy situation. Are you certain you want to open this door? I gripped the steering wheel, a cold smile touching my lips. They are not family, Oliver. They are a failing enterprise that just tried a hostile takeover on my life. Dig everything up. I want to know exactly how deep their ruin goes. Oliver let out a low whistle on the other end of the line. When you put it in those terms, it is hard to argue. I will redirect the primary mergers and acquisitions team to this immediately. We will treat them exactly like a corporate entity targeted for a hostile takeover. But, Naomi, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about halting the IPO preparations? The board of directors is going to want a very clear explanation for the sudden delay. I kept my eyes fixed on the taillights of the car in front of me, my mind operating with the clinical precision that had built Apex Root Solutions. Tell the board we are doing a mandatory 48-hour security sweep on all executive backgrounds to ensure zero liabilities before we file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It is not even a lie. My biological relatives just tried to extort me for a $200,000 bridge loan in a public space. That makes them a massive potential liability. I want to know if they have the leverage or the platform to cause any actual public relations damage to this company. Understood, otherwise said, his tone shifting instantly into the sharp, aggressive cadence of the ruthless corporate attorney I paid 7 figures a year to retain. What are the exact parameters of the search? I want the standard elite tier forensic sweep, I instructed, navigating my car toward the highly secured gates of my penthouse building. Start with Jamal. He claims to own a commercial real estate brokerage that is moving millions, but he was wearing a cheap suit and aggressively begging for a civilian cosigner. Pull his business licenses. Check the state registry for any disciplinary actions or suspended credentials. Run a deep trace on all properties currently listed under his name or any affiliated shell companies. I want our best private investigators to rip through his ledgers. I want to see his debt-to-income ratio. Find out exactly who holds the paper on his business loans. If he is borrowing from private high-interest lenders or shadow banks, I want their names and contact information. Oliver typed rapidly in the background, the heavy clacking of his mechanical keyboard echoing through my car speakers. Got it. And your sister Brittany claims she is a vice president somewhere, I said, pulling into the private underground parking garage of my building. Verify her employment history immediately. Check her credit score. Look for maxed out credit cards, defaulted car loans, and any outstanding civil judgments. She was carrying a counterfeit or severely outdated designer bag tonight, pretending to be wealthy while shaking down her estranged sister. I guarantee she is living entirely on credit to maintain a fake social media lifestyle. I want to know exactly how much money she owes and to whom. I parked my car in my designated spot. Killed the engine, but stayed inside the quiet cabin. The pristine silence of the luxury garage contrasted sharply with the chaotic, suffocating noise of the restaurant I had just left. And your parents? Oliver asked gently, his tone softening just a fraction. Richard and Caroline are the primary architects of this whole masquerade, I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They portrayed themselves as wealthy, seasoned investors tonight. Sitting at a table with a $4,500 dinner bill they expected me to pay. Look into their retirement accounts. Check for multiple mortgages on their primary residence. See if they have filed for Chapter 11 or Chapter 7 bankruptcy in the last decade. 12 years ago, they drained my bank account and vanished without a trace. I want to know how they survived after that, and what specific financial disaster led them to crawl back to Texas looking for a handout. Oliver paused. Naomi, I have managed your legal and financial affairs since you were operating out of a rented co-working space. I have seen you crush rival tech firms and dismantle hostile shareholders without breaking a single sweat. But family is an entirely different arena. When we deploy the firm's private investigators to dig into blood relatives, things get incredibly messy. We are going to find skeletons. We might uncover things that will legally bind us to report them to federal authorities. Are you emotionally prepared to see the people who raised you reduced to criminal financial profiles? I stepped out of the car, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. I walked toward the private elevator that required biometric scanning to access my penthouse. I am not emotionally compromised by them, Oliver, I stated firmly, pressing my thumb against the biometric scanner. The heavy elevator doors slid open silently. The people who raised me died to me the day I woke up from a hospital bed to find an empty house and a note telling me to figure it out. Tonight was merely a business meeting with hostile predatory actors. They thought they were manipulating a naive mid-level tech employee. They thought they could bully me into signing away my pristine credit to save their sinking ship. I stepped into the elevator, watching the doors close and seal me in a soundproof box of steel and glass. They do not realize they just tried to extort the chief executive officer of a company about to be valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. I continued as the elevator shot upward. I have an army of the best forensic accountants and private investigators in the country at my disposal. Use them. I authorize unlimited billable hours for this weekend. I want a comprehensive, devastating dossier on my desk by Monday morning. I want every single financial transaction they have made in the last 5 years mapped out, categorized, and weaponized. Consider it done, Oliver said, all hesitation vanishing from his voice entirely. I will wake up the investigative team right now. We will follow the money. We always do. Enjoy your evening, Naomi. Let us do the dirty work. The call disconnected just as the elevator doors opened directly into my penthouse. The automated smart home system registered my arrival, slowly raising the lights to a soft, warm glow and opening the motorized blinds to reveal a breathtaking panoramic view of the Austin skyline. I walked across the imported hardwood floors, dropping my keys onto the marble kitchen island. I poured myself a glass of mineral water, intentionally bypassing the vintage wine collection that alone cost more than the ridiculous loan they had demanded. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the glittering city. I thought about Jamal sweating over the bill at the steakhouse. I thought about Brittany's fake theatrical tears. I thought about Richard and Caroline's desperate, arrogant demands masked as family loyalty. They had spent their entire lives treating me like I was small, insignificant, and disposable. They had relied on my submissive nature, assuming that the passage of time would make me desperate for their validation. They had entirely miscalculated the woman I had become. I walked over to my home office and woke up my multi-monitor workstation. I pulled up my own encrypted financial dashboards. The screens illuminated with secure access protocols, revealing diversified stock portfolios offshore holding companies I had established for tax efficiency, and the massive equity I held in Apex Route Solutions. I possessed more liquid capital in my checking account than Jamal would likely see in his entire lifetime. I had clawed my way out of the dirt to build this empire. I had survived starvation, exhaustion, and total isolation. I had forged myself into an absolute weapon, and my family had just willingly walked right into my line of fire. They wanted to use me to fix their financial ruin. They had absolutely no idea that I was about to buy their ruin and become the master of their fate. The investigation was officially underway, and I knew with absolute certainty that Oliver was going to find something devastating. Monday morning arrived with the sterile, quiet hum of my executive suite. I stood by the espresso machine, watching the dark liquid fill my cup, my mind entirely detached from the upcoming board meetings. Exactly at 8 o'clock, a secure encrypted email pinged on my private monitor. The sender was Oliver. The subject line was blank. I set my coffee down, locked the office door, and opened the file. It was a 90-page dossier containing the absolute financial destruction of the people who shared my DNA. Before I even processed the first page, my eyes caught a glimpse of a scanned credit report in the appendix, and my chest tightened. The layout of that specific document pulled me violently backward in time. I was no longer a wealthy chief executive. I was 21 years old again, standing in the cramped, smelly office of a cheap apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. I had been working 80-hour weeks, splitting my time between a warehouse job and waiting tables, saving every single dollar in a shoebox because no bank would give me an account. I had handed my application to a tired leasing agent, begging for a tiny, roach-infested studio apartment so I could finally have a roof over my head. I remember the look of utter disgust on the agent's face when she slid the paperwork back across the scratched desk. She told me I had a credit score in the low 400s. She pointed to a list of defaulted credit cards, unpaid utility bills, and massive loans I had never seen before in my life. I tried to explain that there had to be a mistake, that I had never owned a credit card. But she just called security and threatened to have me arrested for fraud. That inexplicable financial ruin condemned me to the streets. For the next 2 years, I slept in the back of a freezing, beat-up Honda Civic. I parked under the flickering streetlights of a 24-hour diner, using their free internet to code the very first algorithms for Apex Route Solutions on a laptop with a shattered screen. I bathed in public park restrooms using cold water and cheap soap, crying silently because the world had branded me a financial criminal and I had no idea why. The sheer exhaustion of coding until my fingers bled, fueled by nothing but leftover diner food and pure survival instinct, forged me into steel. I blinked away the ghost of that starving girl and focused on the glowing screen in front of me. I opened the first section of Oliver's forensic autopsy. It belonged to Jamal. My brother-in-law had spent the weekend posting photos on his social media accounts, showing off rented sports cars and checking into VIP lounges, portraying himself as a commercial real estate mogul fighting against systemic oppression. The reality sitting on my desk was a masterclass in pathetic, desperate fraud. Oliver's investigators had ripped through the facade with brutal efficiency. Jamal did not own a successful brokerage. His business was entirely funded by high-interest predatory loans from shadow lenders. He was paying astronomical interest rates, bleeding cash daily just to keep the lights on in his fake executive office. Worse, his real estate license was not just under review, it was currently suspended by the state regulatory board. He was under active investigation for commingling client escrow funds to pay his personal debts, a massive ethical and legal violation that would likely result in permanent disbarment. The luxurious mansion he and Brittany endlessly flaunted online was heavily leveraged. They had taken out a third mortgage 6 months ago, and Oliver had located the default notices. The bank had already initiated the pre-foreclosure process. If Jamal did not produce $200,000 immediately, the bank would seize the property, auction it off, and leave them homeless. That was the exact amount they had demanded from me at the steakhouse. They had tried to manipulate me into co-signing a completely toxic loan to save their sinking ship. I scrolled down to Brittany's file. The brilliant vice president my mother had bragged about was actually a mid-level administrative assistant at a failing logistics firm. Her credit report was a disaster zone of maxed-out retail cards, unpaid cosmetic surgery bills, and defaulted auto loans. She was drowning in debt just to maintain the illusion of wealth, buying counterfeit designer bags and desperately clinging to a social status that did not actually exist. They were parasites feeding on borrowed money, and the host had finally died. A dark, satisfying smile touched my lips. I had them. They had walked into my city acting like royalty, treating me like a peasant, while carrying a financial death sentence in their pockets. But as I scrolled to the final section of the dossier, the section dedicated to Richard and Caroline, my private secure phone line rang. It was Oliver. I answered, putting him on speaker. Naomi Oliver said, his voice stripped of its usual corporate detachment. It sounded heavy, almost hesitant. "Have you reached the third section of the report yet?" "I am just opening it now," I replied, my eyes scanning the dense legal text detailing my parents' banking history. "I see a trail of bankruptcies from 10 years ago. It looks like they lost everything shortly after they abandoned me." "Stop reading and listen to me," Oliver interrupted sharply. "You need to hear this directly from me before you look at the evidence. When I put the investigative team on your parents, I told them to trace every single dollar back to the day they vanished. I wanted to know exactly how they funded their escape across state lines." My hand hovered over the mouse. I felt a strange, cold dread pooling in my stomach. "What did you find, Oliver?" He exhaled a long, heavy breath. "Naomi, your credit score was not destroyed by a clerical error 12 years ago. We found the original loan origination documents. We tracked the signatures and the routing numbers." The silence in my office suddenly felt deafening. The ghost of that freezing car and the shattered laptop hovered right behind my chair. "Tell me," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous absolute zero. Oliver did not sugarcoat it. "Richard and Caroline did not just abandon you to protect their own finances. They used your social security number. They forged your signature on massive personal loans, credit lines, and utility bills. They took out a staggering amount of debt in your name when you were just 18 years old, entirely destroying your financial identity before you even had a chance to start your life." The words hung in the air, toxic and paralyzing. They had not just left me to figure it out, they had actively, maliciously buried me alive. They had stolen my identity to fund their own survival and discarded me to take the fall. The anger that ignited in my chest was not the hot, chaotic rage of a victim. It was the cold, blinding fury of a predator who had just found her prey. Oliver waited for my response, the line crackling with tension. I stared at the screen, my entire reality shifting into sharp, violent focus. The time for setting boundaries was officially over. I was going to utterly destroy them. "Send me the exact routing data I told Oliver." My voice, surprisingly steady for someone whose entire past had just been violently rewritten. "I want to know where every single cent of that money went." I heard the rustle of papers over the secure line, followed by the clicking of Oliver accessing the encrypted financial logs. "The total amount of fraudulent debt they originated under your Social Security number was exactly $150,000, Oliver stated, his tone clinical, but carrying a heavy undercurrent of disgust. "They executed this with terrifying precision, Naomi. Because you had just turned 18, your credit profile was a complete blank slate. They had access to your original birth certificate and your Social Security card. They fabricated employment records using a shell company Richard had registered years prior, artificially inflating your income to bypass the automated underwriting systems of 3 different major banks." I stood frozen behind my desk, my eyes fixed on the city skyline, though I was not truly seeing it. $150,000. That was the invisible mountain of debt that had crushed my 20s. That was the reason every lease application was denied. That was the reason my car was repossessed. That was the reason I spent freezing nights crying in the back of a vehicle, wondering why the financial system had blacklisted me. "Where did they transfer the funds, Oliver?" I demanded, my grip on the edge of the mahogany desk tightening until my knuckles turned stark white. "Did they use it to survive after Richard's business failed?" "No," Oliver replied bluntly. "The forensic trace is crystal clear. They did not use a single dollar of this money for survival. 2 days after the final loan was approved and the funds were deposited into a joint account they forced you to open as a teenager, they executed a series of massive wire transfers. $45,000 was wired directly to a luxury resort and wedding venue in Florida. Another $30,000 was dispersed among high-end florists, caterers, and a bridal boutique." I stopped breathing. The air in my executive office suddenly felt thin and suffocating. A wedding, I repeated the syllables, tasting like ash in my mouth. Yes, Oliver confirmed. We cross-referenced the dates and the vendors. Naomi, this money paid for Brittany and Jamal's wedding. Every single bottle of champagne they drank, every exotic flower arrangement on their tables, the designer dress your sister wore while she walked down the aisle. It was all entirely funded by the fraudulent loans taken out in your name. My vision narrowed. The sheer, unadulterated evil of their actions began to crystallize in my mind. Brittany's lavish destination wedding, the event of the decade that I was conveniently not invited to because of my supposed estranged behavior, was bought and paid for with my stolen future. They had quite literally sacrificed my life to fund her grand entrance into high society. And the rest of the funds, I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. There is still $75,000 unaccounted for. That is where Jamal comes into the picture, Oliver continued, the disdain in his voice growing sharper. 1 week after the wedding, vendors were paid a cashier's check for $75,000 was issued from that same compromised account. It was made payable to a title and escrow company. We pulled the property records. That money served as the exact down payment for Jamal and Brittany's first luxury home. It was the property Jamal used to leverage his entry into the commercial real estate market. The entire foundation of his business, the very wealth he was loudly bragging about at the steakhouse tonight, was built directly on your financial corpse. A profound, terrifying silence settled over my office. The scattered pieces of my past violently snapped together, forming a horrifying picture of absolute betrayal. When I was 20 years old, lying in a hospital bed, recovering from emergency surgery, my parents were not struggling. They were busy executing the final stages of a massive federal crime against their own daughter. When I returned to that empty house and found their cruel note telling me to figure it out, they were not fleeing from poverty. They were fleeing the jurisdiction, packing their bags to attend my sister's stolen luxury wedding 2 states away. They drained the funds, abandoned the debt to me, and vanished, knowing the collection agencies and bank investigators would eventually hunt down a sick, penniless college dropout. They had used my identity as a human shield and discarded me to the wolves so they could play wealthy aristocrats. This changes everything, Oliver, I said, walking slowly away from the window and taking a seat in my executive chair. The desire to simply establish boundaries and walk away evaporated from my mind, replaced by a cold, calculating demand for absolute annihilation. I do not just want them out of my life. I want them to pay for this. You have every right to want blood, Naomi Oliver advised cautiously. What they committed is identity theft, bank fraud, and wire fraud. These are severe federal felonies. But we have a jurisdictional issue. This happened 12 years ago. The standard statute of limitations for wire fraud is typically 5 years. Criminal prosecution might be incredibly difficult to pursue at this stage. I smiled, a sharp, predatory expression in the empty room. I had spent the last decade mastering the intricate, ruthless laws of American corporate finance. I knew exactly how to navigate this battlefield. You are forgetting the federal discovery rule for fraud, Oliver, I stated, opening the digital file he had sent and downloading the loan origination documents to my secure server. In cases of concealed financial fraud and identity theft, the statute of limitations is frequently told. The clock does not start ticking when the crime was committed. The clock starts ticking the moment the victim reasonably discovers the fraud. I did not discover this 12 years ago. I thought I was simply the victim of predatory banking errors and bad credit reporting. I discovered the actual physical proof of their forgery tonight. Oliver let out a sharp breath of realization on the other end of the line. You are absolutely right. The clock starts today. We have a fully loaded legal weapon. We can hand this entire dossier over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation by tomorrow morning. Richard and Caroline will be facing federal indictments before the end of the week. No, I commanded, shutting down the file and locking my workstation. Calling the authorities right now is far too quick. It is too easy. If they are arrested tomorrow, they will simply play the victims. They will cry to the extended family that I am a vindictive, wealthy CEO throwing my poor, elderly parents in prison over a misunderstanding. I want to dismantle their lives piece by piece. I want them to look around and realize they have absolutely nothing left, and I want them to know exactly who took it from them. What is your directive? Naomi Oliver asked, his tone shifting into absolute alignment with my strategy. Prepare the legal trap, I ordered. We are going to let them think they have won. We are going to let them believe they can extort me. Keep compiling the debt portfolios for Jamal and Brittany. I want to own every single financial instrument attached to their names. We are going to weaponize the American financial system against them, and when the trap snaps shut, there will be nothing left for the authorities but the bones. Oliver let out a sharp, appreciative exhale over the speakerphone. I have spent my entire career representing ruthless executives, Naomi, but you might just be the most terrifying client I have ever had the pleasure of defending. I will start drafting the internal memorandum immediately. We will timestamp this digital forensic discovery as of tonight at 11:45. By generating an official internal audit record and sending it through secure firm channels, we legally anchor your moment of discovery. The clock on the federal statute of limitations for wire fraud and identity theft begins right now. You have an active, loaded legal gun pointing directly at Richard and Caroline, and we can pull the trigger whenever you say the word. I paced the length of my office, the soft glow of the city illuminating the expensive hardwood floor beneath my feet. Pulling the trigger now is a waste of ammunition, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Think about how the justice system works for people who look like my parents. They are white, affluent-appearing elderly suburbanites. If I hand this file to the Federal Bureau of Investigation tomorrow, they will hire a defense attorney who specializes in generating sympathy. They will stand in front of a judge, cry about their declining health, and claim they made desperate mistakes out of love for their family. Best case scenario, they get probation or a few months in a white-collar facility. They will spin a narrative to our extended family that I am a heartless, greedy billionaire who sent her sick parents to prison over a misunderstanding. They will become martyrs. Oliver murmured his agreement. The court of public opinion is rarely swayed by financial documents. They always favor the crying mother. Exactly, I said. But if we target their fake wealth, we destroy the only thing they actually care about. My parents and my sister do not value family. They value status. They value the perception of superiority. Brittany and Jamal have built their entire identities on the illusion of being high society elites. My parents feed off that illusion. If we strip them of their money, their homes, and their credit, we strip them of their protective armor. In modern America, financial ruin for people obsessed with status is a punishment far worse than any jail cell. I want them humiliated in front of the very people they are trying to impress. How do you want to structure the acquisition? Oliver asked, shifting immediately into tactical execution mode. Set up a blind trust in Wyoming by tomorrow morning, I instructed. Wyoming offers the most aggressive privacy protections for corporate entities in the country. From that trust, spin off an anonymous limited liability company. We will use that shell corporation to act as our primary investment vehicle. I want you to reach out to the hard money lenders holding the notes on Jamal's commercial properties and his personal mansion. Oliver was already typing furiously. Jamal is heavily leveraged with secondary and tertiary lenders. Those guys charge astronomical interest rates because the loans are incredibly high risk. Given Jamal's suspended real estate license and his upcoming missed payments, those lenders are likely panicking. They know a standard foreclosure process in this market could take months or years, eating up massive legal fees. They will want cash now to mitigate their losses. I finished the thought for him. Approach them as an aggressive debt buyer. Offer to purchase Jamal and Brittany's entire distressed debt portfolio. Offer them 40 cents on the dollar, cash closing within 48 hours. They will jump at the opportunity to offload toxic assets quickly. Once those assignment contracts are signed and recorded, my anonymous company will become the sole legal owner of all their debt. I will hold the deed of trust to their house. I will control the liens on their business properties. I will literally be their bank. It is a flawless maneuver, Oliver noted, his voice carrying a note of genuine professional respect. As their primary creditor, you will have the absolute right to call in the loans the second they default. And considering they flew to Texas to beg you for $200,000, they are absolutely going to default by the first of the month. Yes, they will, I said. But they do not know I am buying the debt. Right now, they think they have a different solution. They think they can extort me. What makes you say that? Oliver asked. Because they are predictable, I explained, walking back to my desk and looking at the thick stack of prospectus documents. Richard and Caroline know that Apex Root Solutions is in a highly sensitive, quiet period before we go public. The Securities and Exchange Commission strictly monitors all public relations and financial stability indicators during this window. My family knows that a sudden scandal, a viral controversy, or a messy public lawsuit could spook institutional investors and potentially derail a multi-million-dollar public offering. They showed up at a public restaurant tonight to establish dominance. When that failed, they realized they need leverage. By tomorrow, they are going to escalate this. They will try to corner me, and they will use the threat of a public family scandal to force me to hand over cash and company equity. If they try to extort a chief executive officer during a quiet period, they are adding corporate blackmail to their list of federal offenses, Oliver warned. I will have the security team at your building double their presence. If they set foot on company property, we can have them arrested for trespassing. No, I countered sharply. Do not block them from the building. I want them to walk right through the front doors of my company. If they want to try to extort me, I am going to roll out the red carpet and let them sit at the negotiation table. I need them to feel incredibly confident. I need them to think they hold all the cards and that I am terrified of their threats. If they believe they are winning, they will drop their guard entirely. They will make arrogant demands on the record. We will let them weave their own noose, and then we will kick the chair out from under them at the perfect moment. I understand the strategy, Oliver said. I will have the Wyoming Trust registered and funded by noon tomorrow. I will deploy a specialized team of debt acquisition brokers to start buying up Jamal's loans before the banks even open. We will secure the paper trail for the identity theft and lock it away in the firm's main vault. Everything will be staged and ready. Make sure the debt purchases are airtight, I reminded him. I do not want any loopholes they can exploit in bankruptcy court. I want to own the ground they walk on. You will own the ground, the walls, and the roof, Oliver promised. Sleep well, Naomi. Tomorrow we go hunting. The call ended, leaving the penthouse in total silence. I looked out at the glittering lights of the Austin skyline one last time before turning away from the window. 12 years ago, they had stolen my identity, ruined my credit, and left me shivering in the back of a car while they drank champagne at a stolen wedding. They had convinced themselves I was a weak, disposable asset. Now, I was utilizing the most aggressive financial weapons in the American corporate arsenal to systematically dismantle their entire existence. The trap was set, the bait was placed, and all I had to do was wait for their greed to push them right into the jaws of absolute ruin. The sun had barely crested the skyline on Wednesday morning when my private cell phone began to vibrate violently against my marble nightstand. It was not a steady professional ring from my executive team. It was a relentless, chaotic barrage of rapid-fire notifications. I sat up in bed, the cool silk sheets pooling around my waist, and reached for the device. My screen was an absolute waterfall of alerts from platforms I rarely checked. Direct messages, tagged posts, and shared links flooded my display. I opened the first link sent by an old high school acquaintance I had not spoken to in over a decade. The message simply read, "How could you do this to your own family?" I clicked the link. It redirected me to a video on a popular social media platform. The thumbnail showed Jamal sitting on the edge of a pristine white sofa in his heavily mortgaged living room. He was not wearing the flashy, ill-fitting designer suit from the steakhouse. Instead, he wore a plain, faded gray shirt. His posture was slumped, his shoulders rounded, to project an image of absolute defeat. Brittany sat just behind him, perfectly out of focus but visible enough so the camera could capture her burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with manufactured silent sobs. I pressed play. Jamal looked directly into the camera, his eyes red and glistening with forced tears. "I did not want to make this video," Jamal began, his voice thick with fake emotion. "I pride myself on being a strong black man who provides for his family, a man who fights through the systemic barriers in the commercial real estate world. But right now, my family is being crushed, and the person holding the boot to our neck is my own sister-in-law, Naomi." My expression remained completely neutral as I watched him deploy a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. Jamal took a shaky breath, looking down at his hands before bravely facing the lens again. "My brokerage is under attack by predatory lenders who want to freeze out minority-owned businesses. We are facing unfair discrimination at every turn. We just needed a tiny bridge loan to survive the month. We flew all the way to Texas to beg Naomi for help. She is the chief executive officer of Apex Root Solutions. She is a multimillionaire. She has more money than she could ever spend in a lifetime. And you know what she did? She looked at my crying wife, her own flesh and blood, and she laughed in our faces. She threw a $100 bill on the table and walked out, leaving us to drown. She abandoned us just because she thinks she is better than the people who raised her." The video cut to black, with a final, pathetic sniffle from Brittany. I checked the metrics. The video had been posted just 4 hours ago. Perfectly timed to hit the morning feed on the East Coast and the South. It already had 50,000 views. Jamal had intentionally tagged local community pages, real estate forums, and social justice groups in our hometown. He had specifically dropped my name, my title, and the name of my company to maximize the collateral damage. He was using his race, his fabricated struggle against systemic bias, and my corporate success to paint me as a greedy, heartless villain who had turned her back on her struggling black brother-in-law. It was a brilliant, utterly sociopathic piece of manipulation. I scrolled down to the comments section. It was an absolute bloodbath. Thousands of strangers were tearing into my character with vicious, self-righteous fury. People were calling me a traitor to my roots. They demanded that Apex Route Solutions be boycotted. They called me a corporate sociopath, an elitist, a woman who had sold her soul for a corner office. The digital mob was demanding justice for Jamal, completely unaware that they were aggressively defending a man who was actively committing massive financial fraud. My phone buzzed again in my hand. This time, it was an alert from my company's public relations director, flagging the video as a potential brand risk. We were in our quiet period before the initial public offering. A viral scandal painting the founder as a callous, anti-family elitist could make institutional investors incredibly nervous. Jamal knew exactly what he was doing. He was attacking my most valuable asset, trying to generate enough negative press to terrify me into submission. He wanted me to panic to call him, begging for a truce to wire the $200,000 just to make the public nightmare go away. I walked into my master bathroom and turned on the cold water. I splashed my face, looking at my reflection in the mirror. 12 years ago, this kind of public humiliation would have destroyed me. The sheer volume of hatred directed at me would have caused a total mental collapse. I would have drafted a frantic, pleading public apology, desperate to clear my name and win back the approval of people who fundamentally despised me. But today, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, predatory focus. I dried my face with a towel and picked up my phone. I dialed my attorney. Oliver answered on the first ring. I saw the video he said, his voice clipped and highly alert. My team is already drafting a cease and desist order. This is textbook defamation, Naomi. He is publicly attacking your corporate entity and making false claims about your financial obligations. We can hit them with a massive civil suit by noon. I want to shut his social media accounts down immediately. No. I instructed, my voice calm and steady. Do not send a cease and desist. Do not contact the platform to have the video removed. I want you to leave it exactly where it is. Oliver paused. Naomi, the video is going viral. It is generating localized negative sentiment. If this gains national traction during our pre-IPO quiet period, the board of directors is going to panic. Let the board panic, I replied, walking into my massive walk-in closet and pulling out a sharp, tailored crimson blazer. I will handle the board. Your job is to preserve the evidence. I want your team to download the video in the highest possible resolution. I want every single comment archived. I want the metadata scraped. Jamal just handed us a loaded weapon. By publicly tying my name and my company to his fraudulent claims, he has officially escalated this from a private family dispute to corporate extortion and defamation. You want to let them dig the hole deeper, Oliver concluded, catching on to my strategy instantly. I want them to excavate a canyon, I confirmed. Never interrupt an enemy when he is making a fatal mistake. Jamal thinks this video is his leverage. He thinks he is breaking my spirit by sending the digital mob after me. He expects me to issue a public statement defending myself. But I am going to give him absolute, total radio silence. I slipped my arms into the crimson blazer, adjusting the lapels. The absence of my reaction is going to drive them completely insane. When a narcissist attacks you publicly and you refuse to engage, they do not just stop. They escalate. They will take my silence as a sign of weakness. They will assume the public pressure is working and they just need to push a little harder to break me. Oliver let out a low chuckle over the secure line. You are baiting them to come to the office. Exactly, I said, strapping my watch to my wrist. They are running out of time on their foreclosures. The video was their warning shot. When I do not respond to the video, they will physically bring the threat to my doorstep. They will come to Apex Route Solutions to demand their ransom in person. Have the debt acquisition team finish buying up Jamal's mortgages today. I want every piece of their financial lives legally transferred to my holding company by the time they show up to extort me. Consider it done, Oliver said. I will secure the digital assets and finalize the debt portfolio purchases. See you at the office, Naomi. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my pocket. The notifications continued to vibrate against my side, a steady stream of engineered hatred from people who did not know me, orchestrated by people who wanted to destroy me. I walked out of my penthouse and headed for the elevator. They wanted to play a public game of manipulation. They were about to learn what happens when you bring a social media video to a corporate execution. By noon, the digital assault had bled into my personal life. Jamal's video had acted as a bat signal, summoning the flying monkeys of my extended family. My phone, usually a quiet tool for corporate strategy, transformed into a weapon of mass harassment. The first call came from my Aunt Patricia, a woman who had not spoken to me since I was 16. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a masterclass in self-righteous fury. She called me a monster, a disgrace to the family name, and accused me of turning my back on my own blood just because I had stumbled into some tech money. 10 minutes later, my cousin Derek texted a barrage of insults, demanding to know how I could sleep at night while my brother-in-law faced systemic ruin. Old family friends, people who had watched my parents abuse me for years and chose to look the other way, suddenly found their moral compass. They flooded my inbox with demands that I issue a public apology and wire the funds immediately. I would be lying if I said it did not hurt. Hearing the voices of people from my childhood, people who had ignored my existence when I was starving in my car, suddenly united in their hatred of me, felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. The trauma responses I had spent years dismantling in therapy tried to claw their way back to the surface. My hands shook as I listened to a particularly vicious voicemail from a woman who used to babysit me, telling me I was rotting from the inside out. The urge to reply, to scream the truth, to send them the irrefutable proof of Richard and Caroline's identity theft burned in the back of my throat. But I refused to justify, argue, defend, or explain. Engaging with a mob only validates their false authority. Responding to their outrage would give them the exact drama they craved and allow them to twist my words further. Instead, I took a deep breath, compartmentalized the visceral sting of their words, and forwarded every single hateful text message, threatening voicemail, and venomous email directly to Oliver's secure server. Oliver's team cataloged every piece of harassment, building an impenetrable wall of evidence that documented my family's campaign of coordinated extortion. I took that collective hatred and fed it directly into the engine of my ambition. The anger burned away the last lingering remnants of my familial guilt. I sat at my mahogany desk, opened the final batch of assignment contracts from the predatory lenders, and authorized the wire transfers. I purchased the primary mortgage on Jamal's flashy suburban mansion. I bought the defaulted lines of credit propping up his failing brokerage. I even acquired the high-interest personal loans Brittany used to finance her counterfeit luxury lifestyle. With a few precise keystrokes, I finalized the paperwork. The ruthless financial maneuver was complete. I was no longer their scapegoat. I was their bank, their landlord, and their absolute master. I locked the trap shut around them. The silence of my victory was broken exactly 48 hours later by the urgent buzzing of my office intercom. My head of security informed me that 4 individuals matching the descriptions of my family were causing a severe disturbance in the main lobby of Apex Route Solutions. They were demanding to speak with my manager. They claimed they needed to discuss an urgent personnel issue regarding my behavior. I instructed security to issue them visitor badges and escort them directly to the executive suite. I stood by the glass doors of my office watching the private elevator numbers climb. Richard, Caroline, Brittany, and Jamal stepped out onto the top floor. They marched forward with arrogant postures, their faces twisted into vindictive sneers. They clearly expected to barge into a crowded cubicle farm and humiliate a mid-level employee in front of her peers, and use the threat of public embarrassment to extort their money. Instead, their shoes sank into plush, custom carpet. They found themselves standing in a massive, silent reception area, encased in brushed steel and floor-to-ceiling glass. My executive assistant stood from her marble desk, offering a perfectly practiced corporate smile. She asked if they would care for sparkling water, and calmly announced that the chief executive officer was ready to see them. Brittany scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "We are not here to see your boss," she snapped, shifting her outdated designer bag on her shoulder. "We are here to see Naomi. Tell her family is waiting and she is in serious trouble." My assistant gestured gracefully toward the double doors where I was standing. "The chief executive officer is waiting for you right there." Caroline froze mid-step. The arrogant sneer melted off Richard's face, replaced by absolute, slack-jawed bewilderment. Jamal stopped breathing. They stared at my tailored designer suit, then looked past me into the sprawling corner office. Their eyes darted to the massive Apex Route Solutions logo etched into the frosted glass behind my mahogany desk. The sheer, staggering scale of the operation hit them like a physical blow. They realized in real time that they were not visiting a corporate drone. They were standing inside a skyscraper entirely commanded by the daughter they had left to starve. The profound shock paralyzed them, but only for a few agonizing seconds. I watched the toxic transformation happen in real time. The panic of their impending financial ruin evaporated from Jamal's face. It was instantly replaced by a blinding, aggressive greed. Brittany's eyes rapidly scanned the imported artwork and the panoramic views of downtown Austin, her mind furiously calculating the immense wealth surrounding her. Caroline practically vibrated with a sudden, horrifying sense of entitlement. They no longer saw a scapegoat to punish. They saw an infinite, glittering bank account, and their twisted minds immediately concluded that my empire belonged to them by right of blood. Jamal straightened his frayed jacket, a predatory grin spreading across his face as he marched past my assistant. I gestured toward the heavy glass doors of my private conference room. It was a soundproof executive bunker designed for high-level mergers and acquisitions, equipped with privacy frosting that could be activated with the push of a button. They walked in like conquering monarchs claiming a newly discovered territory. Brittany immediately ran her hand along the edge of the custom mahogany table, her eyes darting to the panoramic view of the Texas Capitol building. Her earlier tears were completely gone, replaced by a hungry, feral gleam. Caroline followed her posture, completely transformed. The weeping, desperate mother from the steakhouse was an act she had entirely discarded. She crossed her arms, looking at me with a sickening mix of triumph and absolute greed. "You certainly kept this a secret," Naomi Caroline said, her voice echoing in the pristine room. "Letting your family worry about you all these years, while you were sitting up here, hoarding this kind of wealth? It is frankly disgusting." I pressed the button on the wall panel. The glass walls frosted over, instantly sealing us off from the rest of the executive floor. "Please take a seat," I instructed, my voice entirely flat and devoid of any welcoming warmth. They sat on one side of the massive table, a united front of financial parasites. I took my seat opposite them, folding my hands over a blank legal pad. I did not offer them coffee. I did not offer them water. I simply stared at them, waiting for the inevitable demand. Jamal leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. The fake humility from his social media video had completely evaporated. "Well, little sister," he said with a coarse laugh, "it looks like you have been holding out on us. But I am a forgiving man. Since you clearly have the capital, we can skip the cosigner paperwork entirely. You can just write a direct check to clear the liens on my commercial business and pay off our mortgage. Consider it a late wedding gift for Brittany." Before I could answer, Richard held up a hand, silencing his son-in-law. Richard had been quiet since stepping out of the elevator. His eyes had been frantically scanning the documents left on the side credenza, specifically the thick-bound prospectuses stamped with the logos of major Wall Street investment banks. He was a man who had failed miserably in business, but he still understood the basic language of corporate finance. "Hold on," Jamal Richards said, his voice dropping into a cold, calculated register. "A check is not going to cut it anymore. Not for this." Richard turned his intense gaze to me, a predatory spark lighting up his aging features. "You are preparing for an initial public offering, aren't you, Naomi? I saw the prospectus drafts on the front desk. I see the investment bank logos. A company taking up this much commercial real estate in downtown Austin, preparing to go public on the stock exchange. We are not talking about a multi-million-dollar valuation here. We are talking about a massive billion-dollar market cap." I kept my face perfectly still, giving him absolutely nothing. He took my silence as immediate confirmation. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, a smug, victorious smile stretching across his face. "You know the strict rules of an IPO, Naomi. You are currently in the mandated Securities and Exchange Commission quiet period. You are legally prohibited from making unauthorized public statements, and your institutional investors are watching every single move you make with a microscope. You are in the most fragile, vulnerable financial window of your entire corporate life. A single scandal right now could absolutely spook your underwriters. A viral controversy could cause the SEC to delay your filing or force you to pull the offering entirely. It would cost you hundreds of millions of dollars. Brittany sat up straighter, finally catching on to her father's aggressive strategy. She looked at me with venomous delight, her entitlement radiating across the table. "Oh, you are completely trapped, aren't you?" Richard placed his hands flat on the mahogany table, leaning forward to deliver his ultimatum. $200,000 is a massive insult for the trauma and abandonment you have put this family through, he declared. Here is what is going to happen today. You are going to pay off every single cent of Jamal's business and personal debt by the end of business today. Furthermore, you are going to draw up a legally binding contract transferring 10% of your founder's equity in this company directly to Brittany. And we want a designated seat on your board of directors. Caroline nodded vigorously, leaning into the extortion attempt. It is only fair, Naomi. She is your older sister. She deserves to share in this success, and we deserve compensation for raising you. You owe this family your life. I looked directly at Richard, maintaining my icy composure. And if I decline this incredibly generous offer? I asked, my tone laced with absolute chilling defiance. Jamal barked a harsh, aggressive laugh. Then we'd take my video national. You saw exactly what happened locally. People in our hometown are furious at you. Now imagine what happens when I take that video to major national news networks. I will sit on national television and tell the world that the CEO of Apex Route Solutions is a racist, elitist monster who discriminates against her own black brother-in-law. I will frame your entire corporate culture as hostile, bigoted, and toxic. I will claim you explicitly denied me a business loan because of my race. In today's social climate, the media will devour you alive. The public backlash will be absolutely apocalyptic. Richard pointed a stiff finger at me, sealing the extortion attempt with undeniable malice. Institutional investors run from racial discrimination scandals like a plague, Naomi. The banks will drop your IPO instantly to avoid the public relations nightmare. Your board of directors will force you to resign as CEO just to save the company from bankruptcy. We will burn your entire tech empire to the ground before you ever get to ring the bell at the stock exchange. The sheer audacity of their demand was almost beautiful in its pure, unfiltered criminality. They were sitting in a soundproof room, actively committing federal corporate extortion, blackmailing a chief executive officer during a federally regulated financial period. They were aggressively leveraging a fake racial discrimination claim to steal 10% of a billion-dollar tech company. They had gleefully handed me the final necessary piece of evidence to ensure their absolute, inescapable destruction. They sat there, radiating arrogant triumph. Brittany was already looking around the room, acting as if she owned the place, likely calculating how she would redecorate the lobby. Jamal was grinning mentally, spending the millions he thought he had just forcefully secured from my bank accounts. Caroline looked at me with a condescending, victorious smirk, fully believing they had just brilliantly checkmated a master corporate strategist. They genuinely thought they had me backed into a corner, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming fear of losing my life's work. They thought my silence was the silence of a defeated, broken woman, desperately trying to calculate a way out of a flawless, inescapable trap. They thought they had won the war. I let the silence stretch for another 10 seconds, letting their arrogance marinate. Every single word they had spoken was recorded on the highly secure surveillance system built directly into the boardroom walls. They were not just digging a financial grave. They were building their own federal prison cell. The transformation was instantaneous and flawless. I watched the satisfaction bloom across their faces as they witnessed a powerful tech executive completely unravel before their eyes. Caroline leaned back, a smug smile of absolute victory replacing her previous hostility. Brittany crossed her arms, rolling her eyes with a scoff of pure disdain. Richard stood taller, puffing out his chest, soaking in the power he thought he had just reclaimed over me. Jamal simply chuckled, an arrogant, booming sound that bounced off the soundproof walls. "Please!" I gasped, letting genuine-sounding desperation bleed into my voice. I leaned forward, my posture crumbling, projecting the image of a woman whose entire world was collapsing. "You cannot go to the press! Jamal, please! I am begging you! If you take that video to the national networks, the underwriters will instantly freeze the initial public offering. The Securities and Exchange Commission will open an inquiry into our corporate practices. The institutional investors will pull their backing before the market even opens. It will destroy everything I have built. It will bankrupt the company." Jamal slammed his hand on the table again, leaning over me like a conqueror. "That sounds like a personal problem, Naomi. You should have thought about your precious investors before you decided to humiliate a black business owner who was just asking his family for a little support. The media is going to feast on your company. You are going to be the face of corporate discrimination." "No, please," I cried out, forcing a single perfect tear to spill over my lower lash line and track down my cheek. I reached out my hand, trembling as if reaching for mercy. "I will do whatever you want. I will give you the money. I will give you the equity. Just please, do not destroy my company. I have worked too hard for this. I cannot lose everything right now." Richard nodded slowly, stepping into his preferred role as the benevolent dictator who had just successfully disciplined a disobedient subordinate. "Now you are finally speaking like a rational adult, Naomi. It is unfortunate that it took a threat to your wallet to make you remember your family loyalty, but we are willing to accept your surrender. You will draft the equity transfer documents for Brittany, and you will prepare the cash transfer to clear Jamal's debts." I wiped my tear-stained cheek with the back of my hand, maintaining the facade of a completely broken woman. "I can do it," I stammered, my voice thick with simulated panic. "But I cannot just write a check or sign over shares today. It is not that simple. Because we are in the mandatory quiet period before the public offering, any sudden transfer of founder equity or massive liquid capital dispersal will immediately trigger an internal compliance audit. My compliance officers monitor every single transaction. If I just hand over stock certificates right now, they will freeze my assets pending an investigation." Brittany slammed her hands on the table. "You are lying! You are just trying to stall us so you can figure a way out of this. Do it today or Jamal releases the video to the national syndicates tonight." "I am not lying," I pleaded, looking directly at Brittany with wide, terrified eyes. "I swear to you, I am not stalling. Corporate law is extremely rigid. I need exactly 1 week to funnel the equity through an offshore holding company and clear the funds through a secondary vendor account so it bypasses the internal auditors. If we do it properly, you get the 10% stake completely tax-free, and Jamal gets his debts wiped clean without raising any red flags with the federal regulators." I knew exactly how to appeal to their overwhelming greed. The mention of tax-free wealth and bypassing regulators was irresistible to people who live their entire lives cutting corners and dodging creditors. I watched Richard process the information. His greedy mind calculated the massive windfall. "Fine," Richard declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You have exactly 1 week, not a single day more. How do you want to handle the transfer?" I lowered my head, staring at the polished wood of the table, playing the part of the defeated captive, dictating the terms of her own surrender. "We need to do this off company property. I will book the VIP penthouse suite at the Four Seasons downtown. We will host a formal signing dinner next Thursday evening. I will have my private attorneys bring the finalized equity transfer contracts and the cashier's checks. You can bring your own legal counsel to review the documents if you want." Once you sign the non-disclosure agreements, the funds and the shares will be released to you immediately. Caroline clapped her hands together, her eyes shining with manic delight. A formal signing dinner at the Four Seasons. That sounds perfectly appropriate for a transaction of this magnitude. It will be a true family celebration. We will finally welcome you back into the fold, Naomi. Jamal adjusted his tie, his chest puffed out with sheer arrogance. Make sure the catering is top tier, little sister. I want vintage champagne ready when we sign those papers. And remember, if you try to pull any tricks, if you try to delay this even by 1 hour, I press send on that video, and your entire company burns to the ground. Do we understand each other? I understand perfectly, I whispered, keeping my gaze lowered to hide the cold, predatory calculation flashing in my eyes. I will have everything prepared by next Thursday. You will get exactly what you deserve. Brittany stood up, grabbing her outdated designer bag with a triumphant scoff. Let us go, Jamal. I cannot stand the smell of this office anymore. It reeks of desperation. We have a luxury dinner to prepare for. The four of them marched out of the glass conference room, a unified front of arrogant, victorious parasites. They strutted through my executive suite, loudly bragging about their incoming wealth, completely ignoring my assistant as they boarded the private elevator. I remained slumped in my chair, listening to the heavy glass doors slide shut, followed by the soft, distant chime of the elevator descending. I waited for 10 seconds in absolute silence. The moment the floor was completely clear, I stopped shaking. The frantic, shallow breathing ceased instantly, replaced by a slow, controlled intake of air. I reached up and casually wiped the single fake tear from my cheek. I pressed the hidden button under the conference table, disabling the privacy frosting on the glass walls. A side door in the adjoining executive lounge clicked open. Oliver stepped into the room, holding his secure tablet. He had watched the entire confrontation through the hidden camera feed. That was a masterful performance, Naomi Oliver said, a sharp, dangerous smile spreading across his face. They swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. They actually believe you are terrified of them. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my crimson blazer, my posture shifting back into absolute dominance. They are blinded by their own greed. They think they just successfully extorted a 10% stake in a billion-dollar enterprise. They are going to spend the next week bragging to everyone they know, setting themselves up for the most public, devastating fall imaginable. Oliver tapped his tablet, saving the video files to the secure server. We have them on federal extortion charges, recorded in high definition. The blind trust in Wyoming is fully funded. The debt acquisition team is ready to finalize the purchase of Jamal's mortgages and Brittany's personal loans. By next Thursday, we will legally own their entire financial existence. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Austin skyline once again. Book the VIP suite at the Four Seasons, Oliver. Order the vintage champagne Jamal requested. Let them dress up in their best clothes and bring their audience. The bait is taken. Now we prepare the slaughter. While my family spent the next 7 days prematurely celebrating their imaginary windfall, Oliver and I went to work. The contrast between our weeks was almost poetic. According to the relentless social media updates Brittany posted, they were shopping for new designer outfits, booking expensive spa treatments, and loudly hinting to their followers about a massive, life-changing corporate acquisition. They were completely intoxicated by the illusion of their impending wealth. Meanwhile, deep inside the secure walls of my executive suite, I was legally purchasing their absolute ruin. The reality of the American financial system is brutal cold and highly efficient if you have the capital to exploit it. When an individual or a business defaults on high-interest loans, the lenders eventually categorize those loans as toxic assets. Shadow banks and predatory lenders do not want to spend years and tens of thousands of dollars dragging a broke real estate broker through a messy, prolonged foreclosure process. They want immediate liquidity. They want cash right now to mitigate their catastrophic losses. Oliver utilized the anonymous Wyoming-based limited liability company we had established. Operating under a completely untraceable corporate umbrella, his specialized team of debt acquisition brokers approached every single institution holding paper on Jamal and Brittany. The negotiations were shockingly brief. Jamal was so severely overleveraged and so deeply in default that his creditors were desperate to offload his files. On Tuesday morning, my anonymous company purchased the third mortgage on Jamal and Brittany's suburban mansion for barely 40 cents on the dollar. On Wednesday afternoon, we acquired the entirety of the defaulted credit lines propping up Jamal's commercial real estate brokerage. By Thursday morning, just hours before our scheduled dinner, Oliver finalized the purchase of Brittany's high-interest personal loans and her defaulted auto financing. I sat at my mahogany desk and reviewed the finalized digital portfolio. With a few swift wire transfers that barely made a dent in my corporate accounts, the transaction was officially complete. The predatory lenders assigned all their rights, titles, and interests directly to my holding company. I was no longer just the estranged sister they had abandoned and tried to extort. I was officially, legally, their primary creditor. I held the actual deed of trust to their flashy house. I controlled the immediate financial lifeline of Jamal's failing business. If they missed a single payment which they already had, I possessed the unilateral legal authority to evict them, seize their vehicles, and force them into immediate bankruptcy. They were strutting around Austin buying expensive champagne on maxed-out credit cards, completely oblivious to the fact that I literally owned the ground beneath their feet. Oliver walked into my office and placed the thick bound folder of the finalized debt assignments onto my desk. "The trap is fully armed and locked," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "We own every single aspect of their financial lives." I placed my hand flat against the heavy folder. "Let us go to dinner," I said. The drive to the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Austin took exactly 14 minutes. I spent the entire ride in absolute silence, mentally reviewing the sequence of events about to unfold. Oliver sat beside me in the back of my chauffeured car, his briefcase resting on his lap. That briefcase held the financial execution of my biological family. I wore a tailored midnight blue dress that fit like armor, paired with diamond stud earrings and my sharpest stilettos. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who controlled a billion-dollar empire. We took the private elevator up to the top floor, stepping out into the hushed, velvet-lined hallway of the VIP penthouse level. I had reserved the absolute best suite the hotel offered, a sprawling two-story space featuring a massive private dining room overlooking the river. I wanted them to have the perfect, opulent stage for their public destruction. Before we even reached the double oak doors of the suite, I could hear the loud, obnoxious laughter echoing down the corridor. They had turned my signing dinner into a victory parade. I gestured for the private security detail to open the doors. As the heavy wood swung inward, the scene before me played out exactly as my cynical corporate mind had predicted. Jamal and Brittany had not just brought their own legal counsel. They had brought an entire audience to witness their ascension into tech equity wealth. The luxurious suite was packed with at least a dozen people. I recognized Jamal's parents, Winston and Grace, sitting on a plush velvet sofa, holding crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Winston was a retired city employee who loved to act like a wealthy patriarch, and Grace was nodding along enthusiastically to a story Brittany was telling. Surrounding them were several of Jamal's flashy real estate associates and a few women I vaguely remembered from Brittany's social media feeds. They were the kind of people who leased luxury cars to look rich while defaulting on their water bills. Jamal was holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a freshly lit cigar in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. He was wearing a brand-new, custom-fitted suit, undoubtedly purchased on credit just for this occasion. He was gesturing widely, his voice booming over the soft jazz playing through the suite's sound system. "It is all about strategic positioning," Jamal boasted to a younger man who was looking at him with clear admiration. "When you have family running a tech startup, you have to guide them. Naomi has done a decent job building the software, but she needed my real estate acumen to really secure her physical assets. That is why she is officially bringing me in today. I am taking over the portfolio." Brittany laughed, a shrill, grating sound that cut through the room. She was wearing a sparkling evening gown that screamed desperation, draped in jewelry that I knew for a fact was cubic zirconia. She touched the arm of one of her sycophantic friends. "Honestly, it is about time Naomi showed some gratitude," Brittany said loudly, making sure everyone in the room could hear her revisionist history. "We supported her so much when she was a struggling college student. Richard and Caroline practically bankrupted themselves trying to help her get on her feet. Now that her little tech venture is paying off, it is only fair that she compensates us for our sacrifices. We are signing the paperwork for a massive equity transfer tonight. 10% of the entire company straight to me." Caroline and Richard were standing near the private bar, soaking in the admiration of Jamal's parents. They looked incredibly smug, playing the roles of the generous, wealthy investors who were finally being rewarded by their prodigal daughter. They were so completely intoxicated by their own lies that they did not even notice when Oliver and I stepped fully into the room. I did not announce myself. I simply stood just inside the threshold, letting my cold, unyielding presence radiate through the space. One by one, the guests noticed me. The loud, boisterous conversations began to falter. The sycophantic laughter died in their throats. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. Within 10 seconds, the sprawling, opulent penthouse suite dropped into a sudden, suffocating silence. The physical shift in the room's energy was palpable. The audience members who did not know me personally could instantly feel the sheer, untouchable power I carried. They instinctively stepped back, clearing a path between me and the grand dining table in the center of the room. Jamal's arrogant smile froze on his face. He lowered his cigar, suddenly looking very small in his new suit. Brittany swallowed hard, her hand dropping from her friend's arm. Richard and Caroline stood frozen by the bar, the color draining slightly from their faces as they took in my armor. I was not the terrified, crying woman they had broken in my office last week. I was the executioner, and the axe was already swinging down. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice perfectly measured, echoing cleanly through the silent suite. "I apologize for interrupting the celebration. Please do not let me stop you from drinking the champagne I paid for." Jamal cleared his throat, trying desperately to regain control of his audience. He puffed out his chest and forced a loud, booming laugh that sounded incredibly hollow. "Look who finally decided to join us," Jamal announced, waving his hand toward the massive dining table. "We were just telling our friends here about the big merger. You brought the paperwork, right, little sister? We have reservations at the club later to celebrate, so let us get these signatures out of the way." I walked slowly toward the head of the dining table. My stilettos clicked sharply against the marble floor, counting down the final seconds of their fake reality. Oliver flanked me on my right, carrying the heavy leather briefcase that held their financial death warrants. I took my place at the head of the table, resting my hands flat against the polished mahogany. I looked at Jamal's parents, at his real estate friends, and at my sister's desperate social circle. They had brought an audience to watch me surrender my wealth. They had provided the exact crowd I needed to witness their utter humiliation. "Oh, I brought the paperwork, Jamal," I replied, my voice dropping to a chilling, absolute calm. "But we are not doing a merger today. We are doing an acquisition." I gestured for Oliver. He placed the heavy briefcase onto the table and unlatched it with 2 loud, sharp clicks. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the silent room. The audience watched with bated breath, entirely unaware that they were about to witness a financial massacre. Jamal stepped right up to the mahogany table, completely unable to contain his greedy anticipation. He smoothed his hands over the lapels of his suit, shooting a victorious wink over his shoulder to his parents and his sycophantic friends. He actually reached his hands out, expecting Oliver to hand him a beautiful embossed folder containing 10% of my company. He expected a ceremonial handover of wealth that would cement his fake status in front of his peers forever. "Let us get this done," Jamal said, a massive grin splitting his face. "Hand over the certificates, Naomi. I have a table waiting for us at the club, and I want to pop this champagne." Oliver did not hand him a single stock certificate. Instead, my attorney reached into the leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of heavily stapled, dense legal documents. The stack was nearly 3 inches thick. Oliver dropped the massive pile of paperwork directly in front of Jamal. The heavy thud of the documents hitting the table echoed in the silent room. Jamal frowned, looking down at the stark, black and white legal text. "This is a lot of reading for a simple equity transfer," he muttered, picking up the top document. "Where is the signature line for the shares?" I stood perfectly straight at the head of the table, looking directly into his eyes. "There are no shares, Jamal," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade of ice. "I did not bring equity. I brought your debt." Jamal froze. His eyes darted down to the paper in his hands. I watched his pupils dilate as his brain struggled to process the bold, legal headers printed across the top of the pages. He was looking at a notice of default, a deed of trust assignment, and a notice of acceleration. "What is this?" Jamal demanded, his voice suddenly losing its booming, confident resonance. "What kind of game are you playing, Naomi? These are my private mortgage papers. How did you get these?" I placed both of my hands flat on the table, leaning forward just enough to assert absolute dominance. "I am not playing a game," I explained, articulating every single syllable with lethal precision. Over the past 48 hours, my legal team contacted every single shadow bank, private lender, and predatory financial institution holding the paper on your completely fabricated life. Using an anonymous holding company, I purchased your entire distressed debt portfolio. I bought the third mortgage on your suburban mansion for pennies on the dollar because your lenders were desperate to offload your toxic files. I acquired the defaulted lines of credit that are failing to prop up your commercial real estate brokerage. I even purchased the high-interest personal loans Brittany maxed out to buy her counterfeit designer wardrobe. The blood completely drained from Jamal's face. He dropped the documents onto the table as if they had physically burned his hands. He took a stumbling step backward, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. I did not stop. I pressed my advantage, driving the reality of his ruin into his chest. "I am now your sole legal creditor," I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the back of the room where his proud parents were sitting. "I hold the deed to your house, Jamal. I control the financial lifeline of your business. I own every single asset you pretend to have. And because you are currently 4 months behind on your payments, you are in absolute, irrevocable default. As of 5 o'clock this afternoon, I am officially exercising the acceleration clauses on every single loan. I am calling in the debts in their entirety." Total pandemonium erupted in the luxurious penthouse suite. Winston Jamal's father stood up from the velvet sofa, his crystal champagne flute slipping from his hand and shattering against the marble floor. The sharp sound of breaking glass broke the spell that had paralyzed the audience. "What is she talking about?" Jamal Winston demanded, his voice trembling with shock and outrage. "You told us your business was generating millions. You told us you were buying a 10% stake in her tech firm. What does she mean she bought your debt?" Grace, his mother, clutched her chest, looking horrified as the whispers broke out among the high society friends they had invited to witness their triumph. The guests were murmuring, casting disgusted, judgmental glances at Jamal and Brittany. The facade of their immense wealth was being violently ripped away in real time, exposing the pathetic, rotting reality underneath. Jamal held up his hands, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperate to salvage his shattered ego. "This is a lie!" he shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "She is bluffing! This is a corporate stunt! She cannot just buy my debt! That is illegal!" "It is perfectly legal, and you know it," Oliver interjected, stepping forward and tapping the stack of documents. "The assignments of deed have already been recorded with the county clerk. You owe my client exactly $842,000 in past due principal interest and late penalties. If you do not produce a cashier's check for the full amount immediately, we will initiate foreclosure and asset seizure tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We will take the house, the cars, and the business accounts. You will be legally bankrupt by Monday." Brittany let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She shoved past Jamal, grabbing the documents from the table. She tore through the pages, her heavily manicured fingers shaking violently as she recognized her own signature on the defaulted loan agreements. "No, no, no!" Brittany screamed, throwing the papers back onto the table. "You promised to pay off our debts. You promised us equity. You agreed to the deal in your office. We had a deal, Naomi." "You tried to extort a chief executive officer during a federally regulated financial period," I corrected her coldly. My eyes locked onto her terrified face. "You attempted to blackmail me with a viral video threatening to destroy my company with false allegations of racial discrimination unless I paid your ransom. You handed me the exact weapon I needed to legally obliterate you. I told you I would have everything prepared by Thursday, and I told you that you would get exactly what you deserve. I kept my promise." The sheer scale of the humiliation was catastrophic. Jamal stood frozen, completely exposed as a fraud in front of the very people he had spent years trying to impress. His peers were stepping away from him, as if poverty was a contagious disease. His parents looked at him with absolute shame and devastation. The brilliant, wealthy real estate mogul they thought they had raised was nothing but a desperate con artist drowning in predatory loans. Caroline and Richard finally snapped out of their paralyzed state. They rushed forward, pushing through the crowd of horrified guests, desperate to regain control of a situation that had just spiraled violently out of their grasp. They still thought they held leverage. They still thought they could threaten me. They had absolutely no idea that I was just getting started, and the debt was only the first bomb I brought to the table. Caroline and Richard marched forward, pushing through the paralyzed guests. Caroline's face was a mask of desperate fury. She pointed a trembling finger at me, opening her mouth to scream, but Jamal beat her to it. He lunged toward the table, slamming both of his fists onto the mahogany surface, trying to physically dominate the space. "You think you can come into my event and humiliate me in front of my family?" Jamal roared, the veins in his neck bulging against his crisp, unpaid-for collar. "You think buying some paper makes you a god? You are nothing but a bitter, lonely woman throwing a tantrum because you could never fit into a real family. I will take you to court. I will sue you for illegal business practices. I will destroy your company's reputation before sunrise." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked at him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing an insect under glass. "You will not take anyone to court, Jamal," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the penthouse suite, ensuring every single guest heard every syllable. "Because going to court requires an attorney, and hiring an attorney requires liquid capital. You currently have a negative balance in all 4 of your checking accounts. Your credit cards have been declined at 3 separate grocery stores this week. I know this because I now hold the data on every financial transaction you have attempted." I turned my gaze away from him and looked directly at his parents, Winston and Grace, who were standing frozen by the velvet sofa. Their expressions were a portrait of utter devastation. They had dressed up tonight to celebrate their son's grand corporate merger. Instead, they were watching his entire existence be exposed as an elaborate, pathetic lie. Winston, Grace, I said, my tone remaining respectful to them but lethal toward their son. I apologize that you had to witness this, but you deserve to know the truth about the man who brought you here tonight. Your son did not invite you to celebrate a merger. He invited you to act as an audience for a shakedown. He has spent the last 5 years feeding you an illusion of success.
Shut up!
Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic as he moved to block my line of sight to his parents. Do not listen to her. She's lying. Am I asked, stepping to the side so his parents could see me clearly. Let us look at the facts. Jamal's real estate license was suspended by the State Regulatory Board 45 days ago. He has not closed a single legitimate commercial deal in over a year. The cars he drives are leased, and those leases are currently in default. But that is not the worst part. I picked up a specific document from the stack Oliver had placed on the table and held it up for the room to see. Your son is under active investigation by the State Ethics Board for commingling client escrow funds I announced, dropping the heavy legal term that made several of his real estate friends in the room gasp in shock. He has been illegally draining the deposits of his own clients to pay the interest on his shadow loans. He is stealing from innocent people to fund the fake luxury lifestyle he posts on the internet. He is not a victim of systemic banking discrimination. He is a financial criminal who ran out of victims to defraud. The silence in the VIP suite was absolute, broken only by a strangled sob from Grace. Winston looked at his son, his face pale and tight with profound shame. Is this true, Jamal? Winston asked, his voice shaking. Have you been stealing from your clients? Have you been lying to us this whole time? Jamal backed away, holding his hands up defensively, completely unable to form a coherent sentence. He stammered, looking frantically around the room for a single sympathetic face, but found only disgust. The high society friends they had invited were already backing toward the door, desperate to distance themselves from a man about to go down for massive federal fraud. I was not finished. The dismantling required total, irrevocable destruction. When his fraudulent scheme finally collapsed, I continued commanding the room once again. Jamal and my sister realized they needed a massive injection of cash to avoid federal prison and homelessness. So they flew to Austin. They tracked me down. And when I refused to blindly hand over $200,000 to fund their criminal lifestyle, Jamal decided to escalate. He went on social media and posted a tearful, manipulative video. He used his race and a fabricated story of discrimination to send a digital mob after me and my company. I took a step closer to the center of the room, my presence towering over the wreckage of their facade. He did this, I explained, looking directly at the remaining guests, knowing that my tech company was in a highly sensitive, federally regulated quiet period before going public. He thought that if he threatened to frame me as a racist, elitist corporate monster on national television, I would panic to protect my investors. He marched into my corporate headquarters last week and explicitly demanded 10% of my company's equity and the complete payoff of all his debts. He tried to extort a billionaire CEO for shares, and he brought all of you here tonight to watch him collect the ransom. Winston shook his head, staring at his son as if looking at a complete stranger. You tried to blackmail your own sister-in-law, Winston whispered, the utter heartbreak in his voice cutting through the tension. You tried to steal from her company because you ruined your own life. We did not raise you to be a thief, Jamal. We did not raise you to be a coward. Jamal dropped his head, his shoulders collapsing inward as the weight of his father's profound disappointment crushed whatever was left of his fake bravado. The reality of his absolute ruin finally set in. He had no money, no business, no reputation, and now no family respect. Brittany could not handle the destruction of her carefully curated world. Her entire identity was tied to the illusion of being wealthy and superior. The sudden, violent shattering of that illusion broke her completely. She let out a piercing, guttural scream, grabbing one of the crystal champagne flutes from the table and hurling it against the wall. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, sparkling like the remnants of her fake life. She spun around, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic and rage. She did not look at me. She looked directly at Caroline and Richard. "Fix this!" Brittany shrieked, stomping her foot like a petulant, terrified child. She grabbed Richard by the lapels of his jacket, shaking him frantically. "Do something, right now! You told me this would work. You said she would cave. You said we would get the money tonight. Tell her to give us our house back. Tell her to fix this." Caroline wrapped her arms around Brittany, shooting me a look of pure, venomous hatred. "You are a monster, Naomi," Caroline hissed, pulling her golden child close. "Look what you are doing to your sister. Look what you are doing to this family. We will not let you get away with this. We will call the police. We will tell the press exactly how unhinged and vindictive you really are." I smiled at Caroline's threat, stepping fully into the space she was trying to claim. "Call the police, Caroline," I challenged, my voice deadly calm. "In fact, I would prefer it if you called them right now. It will save my attorney the trouble of having to forward this next file to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Richard puffed out his chest, stepping in front of his wife and gripping her arm. "You are bluffing, Naomi. You have nothing on us. We have done absolutely nothing wrong. We will go to the press tomorrow morning and tell them exactly how you cornered your own family in a hotel room to terrorize them." I did not even bother responding directly to his pathetic posturing. I simply extended my hand toward my side. Oliver stepped forward with the sleek efficiency of a predator locking onto its prey. He held a thick, heavy red folder. He did not drop it on the table. He walked directly up to Richard and shoved the folder hard against his chest, forcing my father to grab it or let it fall. "Open it, Richard," I commanded. Richard fumbled with the clasp, his arrogance faltering as he flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. Caroline peered over his shoulder. The color drained from both of their faces so rapidly they looked like corpses. Their eyes widened as they stared at the impeccably preserved copies of loan origination documents, bank wire transfers, and forged signatures from over a decade ago. "You want to go to the press?" I asked, my voice echoing off the high ceilings of the penthouse suite. "Let us review the press release I have prepared for them. 12 years ago, when I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from emergency surgery, my loving parents were exceptionally busy. They were busy stealing the Social Security number of their 18-year-old daughter. They were busy forging my signature to originate $150,000 in fraudulent loans." Brittany stopped crying instantly. She looked at her parents in absolute confusion. What is she talking about? I kept my eyes locked on Richard, watching his hands tremble violently against the red folder. "I am talking about a massive, orchestrated federal crime, Brittany. I am talking about the fact that your lavish destination wedding was completely funded by identity theft. The designer dress you wore, the flowers, the luxury resort, it was all paid for with stolen money. They drained the funds, destroyed my financial identity, and then abandoned me to deal with the collection agencies so they could play rich at your wedding reception." "That is a lie," Caroline gasped. But her voice was a thin, terrified squeak. "It has been over 10 years. You cannot prove anything." Oliver stepped forward, adjusting his tie with lethal calm. "Actually, Caroline, we have already proven everything. The forensic accounting trail is absolute and irrefutable, and if you are relying on the statute of limitations to save you, you are severely underestimating the legal team your daughter employs." Under the federal discovery rule for concealed financial fraud, the statute of limitations does not begin when the crime is committed. The clock starts the exact moment the victim discovers the fraud. I stepped closer, boxing them in completely. I did not discover the paper trail 12 years ago, I explained softly. I discovered it last night. The clock started yesterday. Richard staggered backward, hitting the edge of the bar counter. He looked down at the red folder as if it were a live grenade. You committed wire fraud, bank fraud, and felony identity theft, I stated, laying out their doom with surgical precision. These are federal offenses. When Oliver hands this dossier over to the authorities, the federal prosecutors will not care about your sob stories. They will look at the paper trail, showing how you deliberately ruined your youngest daughter's life to fund a party. You are both facing up to 20 years in federal prison. The room descended into a horrifying, suffocating silence. Jamal's parents looked entirely sickened, backing away toward the door. Brittany stared at Caroline and Richard in pure horror, finally realizing that the wealth she had based her entire personality on was built on a foundation of federal felonies. My parents stood frozen, their skin ghostly pale, unable to speak, unable to threaten, and completely stripped of their power. I let the silence hang in the air, allowing the absolute gravity of their situation to fully crush whatever defiance remained in them. I stepped back and signaled to Oliver. He pulled a second set of documents from his briefcase and laid them out on the polished mahogany table. 2 distinct piles of paper. I pointed to the red folder still clutched in Richard's shaking hands. Option A is simple, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy tension of the penthouse. Oliver walks out of this room and forwards that entire dossier directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Simultaneously, my holding company initiates immediate foreclosure proceedings on your house, Jamal. Your business accounts will be frozen by Monday morning. You and Brittany will face absolute public bankruptcy, and Richard and Caroline will spend their twilight years sitting in a federal penitentiary. Caroline let out a strangled gasp, leaning heavily against the bar for support. I moved my hand to the fresh stack of documents on the table. Option B is your only exit strategy, I continued, offering zero warmth and absolutely no forgiveness. You will sign this ironclad cease and desist order, establishing a permanent, legally binding, no-contact mandate. Jamal, you will sign the deed of your heavily leveraged suburban mansion over to my anonymous company right now to clear your outstanding debt. Furthermore, you will immediately post a public retraction of every single lie you told in that pathetic viral video, confessing to your audience that you fabricated the entire story to cover up your own massive financial fraud. And then all 4 of you will vanish from my life forever. The high society friends and Jamal's parents watched in horrified silence. The wealthy facade had shattered completely, leaving nothing but ugly, desperate reality. Brittany sobbed uncontrollably, grabbing Jamal's arm. Jamal's hands shook violently as he stared at the documents, realizing he was legally surrendering his prized mansion. He knew the alternative was federal prison for his in-laws and a devastating public trial for himself. Carolyn wept openly, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. "Naomi, please," Carolyn begged, her voice cracking with terror. "Have some mercy." "You exhausted my mercy 12 years ago when I was recovering from surgery and you stole my identity," I replied, without a single shred of empathy. "Sign the papers or we proceed with option A right now." Sweating, crying, and completely humiliated in front of the very audience they had invited to witness their glorious triumph, they picked up the pens. Jamal signed away his house with a trembling hand visibly broken. Brittany signed the no-contact agreements, her tears staining the legal parchment. Richard and Caroline, stripped of their arrogance and reduced to terrified criminals, frantically scrawled their names to avoid federal indictments. The audience of elite guests averted their eyes, thoroughly embarrassed to even be associated with them. Oliver systematically gathered the signed documents from the polished mahogany table, checking each signature with a cold, forensic precision. He slid the heavy papers into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a sharp, echoing sound that signaled the absolute end of their reign of terror. I did not offer a single word of parting advice or a forced sympathetic goodbye. I simply turned my back on the wreckage of my biological family and walked out of the penthouse suite, leaving them to face the horrified, suffocating silence of the high society audience they had so eagerly invited. Fast forward 6 months, and the natural consequences of their greed played out exactly as I had anticipated. Karma, as it turns out, is incredibly efficient when you remove the financial safety nets protecting toxic people. Jamal and Brittany's marriage did not survive the loss of their primary assets. The moment my holding company took legal possession of their suburban mansion and foreclosed on the commercial business lines, their entire relationship violently imploded. Their marriage had never been built on mutual respect or genuine love. It was a shallow partnership, constructed entirely on the illusion of high society status. Without the counterfeit designer bags, the luxury cars, and the sprawling house to project their superiority, they turned on each other with vicious public hostility. Their divorce was a spectacular, bitter spectacle. To satisfy the terms of our cease and desist agreement, Jamal was forced to post a comprehensive retraction video on all of his social media platforms. He had to sit in front of the camera, stripped of his expensive suits, and confess to his followers that his previous claims of systemic discrimination were entirely fabricated to cover up his own massive financial fraud and mismanagement. The digital mob that had been so eager to tear me down instantly turned their righteous fury on him. His remaining clients fled, his professional network evaporated, and he was completely ostracized from the commercial real estate community. Brittany moved into a cramped, noisy studio apartment across town, forced to take a minimum wage retail job just to pay off the massive mountain of personal debt she had accumulated buying luxury goods. Richard and Caroline faced an even more severe reckoning. To avoid the federal indictments for identity theft and wire fraud, they had been forced to liquidate every single asset they possessed to pay back the heavily inflated, decades-old debt they owed me. The financial drain left them absolutely destitute. They were forced to pack whatever belongings they could fit into a rented truck and move into a run-down, dilapidated trailer park on the outskirts of the state. Their social destruction was even more absolute than their financial ruin. The extended family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had eagerly bombarded me with hateful messages after Jamal's initial video, received a very clear, heavily documented legal packet from Oliver's office. When they saw the undeniable black and white proof that Richard and Caroline had stolen my social security number to fund a lavish wedding while leaving me to starve the familial support, vanished instantly. The flying monkeys who had been so quick to judge me were utterly sickened by the betrayal. Richard and Caroline were entirely shunned, left to rot in their trailer park in absolute suffocating isolation. They had spent their entire lives prioritizing their social image over their own daughter, and now they had absolutely no one left to perform for. The most profound lesson to emerge from Naomi's devastating yet triumphant journey is that biological ties do not automatically guarantee loyalty, love, or respect. Society conditions us from a very young age to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, an institution demanding endless forgiveness, infinite patience, and unconditional sacrifice. However, Naomi's experience brutally dismantles this toxic myth, revealing that sharing DNA does not entitle anyone to exploit your kindness, manipulate your empathy, or destroy your financial future. When her parents and sister used her as a human shield for their identity theft, and later attempted to extort her corporate success, they demonstrated that some relationships are anchored entirely in parasitic convenience rather than genuine affection. Recognizing this painful reality is the first crucial step toward ultimate emotional liberation. We are often taught to shrink ourselves to endure mistreatment quietly, simply to keep the peace at family gatherings, or to willingly accept the role of the scapegoat to accommodate the fragile egos of entitled golden children and narcissistic parents. Naomi's relentless, calculated rise from a freezing, broken down car to a $1 billion corporate corner office proves that true power comes from severing those destructive tethers. She teaches us that establishing absolute titanium boundaries is not an act of bitterness, selfishness, or malice, but a fundamental, non negotiable requirement for self preservation. You simply cannot heal in the exact same environment that continuously attempts to break you. True family is constructed entirely through mutual respect, unwavering support, and authentic connection, rather than forced biological obligation. When we finally stop seeking validation from those who are committed to misunderstanding and diminishing us, we reclaim the energy needed to build our own empires. If you are ready to reclaim your power and establish your own unshakable boundaries, share your story in the comments below and subscribe to join our empowered community.